Hello, I'm Alex Cox, game director of Mafia the Old Country, and welcome to this spoilerific, spoiler-filled, spoileracious trip back to the beginning of the game and a little director's commentary over, to give some insights into how we made this mission, prologue mission. I'm joined by Steve Noak, the incredibly talented art director of Mafia the Old Country.
Thank you. Hello, everybody.
And together we're going to do our best to share some insights. All right. So yeah, here we are. We start the mission in the darkness, don't we? Deep in the earth. That was the idea behind this whole beginning part. Actually, was we've gone back to the beginning of the Mafia timeline. It's a prologue, it's a prequel story, of course. We've gone back to Sicily. And really, I thought it was very interesting that we were kind of originating from, coming from nowhere, coming from the ground, as it were, where the Mafia originated, where our story originated. We come through the earth here, like hearing the underground, the rumblings of the volcano and the rocks. And then, here we go. We light up, after that little kind of sequence to reveal Enzo, our protagonist, our hero. He's going to sort of lead us on this journey through the history of the Sicilian Mafia. This is where from a development perspective where everything began. From my one of the first ideas that we had about what made this game different and special and was with Enzo's story, of course, and his background.
It's such a unique setting, isn't it, and story for a Mafia game.
That's right. As a Caruso, as one of these kind of boy miners, it's important for us. Obviously, this game fits into a franchise, doesn't it? So, it sits alongside the other Mafia games, and we, every one of our heroes needs some kind of identity, and that characterizes them and their story, makes them different from the others, while living within the same universe of kind of franchise stories. So, for Enzo, this idea that he really, unlike the American heroes, who'd been brought up in, a very different environment, he really was surviving in this very brutal kind of, almost medieval kind of situation, right? Where he's, manual labor, risk of death, abandoned as a child.
And we often talk in those terms, don't we? Like in terms of what is the protagonist in any Mafia game, what are their driving factors? And I think we were about to see Enzo to some extent. Like one of the themes that Enzo, that we come back to a lot in the story is that of family. Enzo finding a family outside this location, within the Mafia family that he comes to meet.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. I mean, this here is obviously with his friend Gaetano. They're recovering this money they've been saving up. Almost got lost to a mine collapse, which has they're obviously relieved to recover this, getting their little mementos here. One of Enzo's, of course, is this horse, which is we introduced this idea that they've got this box where they've been secreting their special things, the money they've been able to scramble together to pay off their debt to the mine, and also these kind of childish icons, so for Gaetano, that's his postcard, precious postcard from a family member. For Enzo, it's this horse, and that I love that image of him, as a young child being abandoned, left to the mine by his father, never to be seen again, with this horse in his hand.
That's right. It's heartbreaking. We never show it, but I think it's really implied by that. You can imagine him holding on to his mother and essentially being sort of pushed to Spadaro.
That's right, and to me, it's that kind of naivety and innocence, maybe expecting they're going to come back one day, and the disappointment here. Here he's rejecting the idea of family. It's important for Enzo at this stage of the story, isn't it? That that idea of family has been completely beaten out of him by 12 or so years of very harsh realities being forced on on a young man.
He can only really rely on himself and maybe Gaetano.
That's right, yeah.
It really comes down to him and his own resourcefulness.
That's right. And so he doesn't, that's where he begins the story, almost completely reliant on his own wits. He somehow survived this this ordeal, and he's just about to escape now. The kind of the green shoots of hope are starting to appear. That he and Gaetano are going to soon be able to leave. But it's important because that idea of family, of course, is important to Enzo in the future in the story. What he finds when he leaves the mine in the Teresi family and in Isabella and such like, which we'll see later on. But here, he is really just all about survival, and that aspect of his story, how he is surviving in a world that's been very unkind to him. I think is one of the things that we wanted to push as making him a relatable character. Some of the things he does later in the story, he does go on to have a criminal career, but we want to frame that against this backdrop of really having nothing, starting from nowhere.
Yes.
And having the world almost completely pitted against him.
I think this is a very memorable character introduction.
As exemplified by Il Merlo, this cruel and mean supervisor, the nemesis, as he was originally referred to in the earliest versions of the story. This idea that Enzo has this hated character that hates him and as well. That they can spar at various points in the story. I think it's very effective. And Raphael's performance here is really superb. I mean, many people have commented to me that he was, a very hateable character. Something that when he finally receives his comeuppance, or when Enzo kills him, is very, very satisfying to finally put paid to him. Interesting that they're actually, that character that we saw that he was being mean to originally was a child. That's something else to remember. For production reasons, we had to replace him with an adult. But he was originally, shouting, screaming at a little boy. Which again, I think sort of gives a good reflection on where his character is intended. So this was kind of intended as a sequence that shows the production of sulfur, right? This whole beginning to the game.
Yes.
Sulfur is an important theme, isn't it? Like where, for Sicilian history, where our story comes from. But this sequence shows it being sort of extracted from the earth.
That's right, and there's like a surfacing theme as well for Enzo and Gaetano here coming into this space. But we had to do a lot of research to understand exactly what, because we could see on the reference images these sort of domed kiln shapes, and we'll walk past one in a minute, and these blocks of sulfur we can see in the background, and we were really trying to piece together exactly how the sulfur is processed. We obviously know it's extracted, and it was one thing that the visit really helped us understand. Was that process of extracting the raw ore, placing it in these kilns that we can see here, which are smoky away because there's a fire under there, which over the period of days is melting the sulfur out of the ore, and we can see that pouring into the sort of wooden formers, creating these big ingots of sulfur, which then the miners are paid for almost by the kilogram.
So here we go, introduced to our first sign of the volcano. Coming back to that sulfur theme, isn't it? Like we did speak a lot about the idea of the sulfur economy, the idea that Sicily is this volcanic island. Many of the the riches of Sicily come from the sulfur itself. Not just here the mining of which was it's a very lucrative resource in the 19th and early 20th centuries, but also it fertilizes the fields, it grows the crops, and actually it really is where the Mafia gravitate to. These kind of like where the Mafia appeared was around these kind of where Sicily, the fruit of Sicily's produce and industrial products and things like that is where the Mafia gravitated to. Wherever there was money, is where this phenomenon grew up of kind of protection rackets and extortion by these criminals. And so thematically we thought it was very interesting. And actually there was an early treatment of the intro sequence, wasn't there, that focused on the flow of sulfur through the whole of the sort of Sicilian economy and the underworld and things like that we eventually replaced with something else. And
it was an explosion that occurred around the Industrial Revolution, wasn't it? Because it was so useful in so many different processes, from gunpowder and explosives and sort of leading into the First World War, as you say, to fertilizer and then the citrus crops that grew up, which became such a focus of Mafia protection rackets.
And that was why why the mine was such an interesting setting for us, wasn't it? Really, because it sort of embodies so much of the context, or the when the mafia first originated. Very, very harsh conditions for everyday people. Poverty was rife. Majority of people were subsistence farmers working in conditions like this, and most of the land, the businesses were owned by this kind of privileged elite that employed the mafia as middlemen. That was the history where the mafia originated. We see here with the Spadaro gang as kind of overseers and guards of this mine. Later, same with the Chiricis. Like, this is where the mafia, what we call the mafia now, that practice of criminality began. And so, again, like the idea of being able to sort of bring that to life here. And, actually coming onto that, and where Enzo got his name from is from a reference to that kind of mafia, sulfur mine mafia. The Brotherhood of Favara was a clan of criminals that formed around some sulfur mines in Agrigento in the 19th century, one of the first documented instances of mafia-like crime in Sicily. Favara was a small town in Agrigento. That was where this sect was centered. And that's where we found Enzo's name. I mean, rule of cool. First thing is, it sounds good. Enzo Favara it's a cool name, but that kind of connection to the history of the mafia we thought was quite interesting.
And these sort of red walls that you can see with the slightly rounded stonework. A little bit of trivia. So this is a byproduct of the sulfur process. So this is, once the ore's been extracted, those are the kind of bits of detritus you're left behind with, and they're sort of made into these cakes, and they build walls and things like that with them.
I love this this bit of this brings back memory to me of trying to solve this problem. We have this problem.
Every tutorial is almost the same, isn't it? You're trying to understand how to help players understand how to perform certain actions in the game, but in a way that feels narratively consistent and just natural.
So in this case, we needed to introduce the idea of the knife, like some previous ideas that we'd had weren't working out. And so we kind of brought this sequence in here specifically to kind of introduce the knife in a, and its kind of wider application. We really wanted the knife to be valuable to the player, not just in duels, but like seen as a valuable sidearm. So we gave it these extra features. It could break locks. It can be used to, you use a throwing knife, which later in the game, other things like that. We need to explain it to the player that you could do these things, that it's got this durability. So this little sequence here was devised to show that, but also to, from a narrative sense, to indicate that Enzo has been living this sort of like a little bit of a criminal life here in the mine for a long time with Gaetano in order to survive. It was a survival mechanism for him and his friend to have to steal food occasionally, to be quite au fait and familiar with these sort of criminal techniques, sneaking around, theft in this case, just to get by. And I think that's one of the things which we wanted to carry through, didn't we, to the rest of the story, to make Enzo relatable, to understand where he came from, and obviously to give a little bit of narrative explanation as to why he can readily picks up the criminal skills that he does when he joins the Chirici family.
We just saw Enzo pick up a note back there, and I love the extra details and depth that the notes add to the narrative. Like, quite often you will play through a mission and you will find a conversation between two other characters which explains something that's happened elsewhere. And I just really like, even when we were playing through it towards the end of the game, seeing how they came together and add little detailed story I wasn't even aware of, even at a late stage. It just really fleshed out the world.
It's a really great device, isn't it? Because it lets us flesh out the world in ways where we don't have time to necessarily show it in the game, but to use that to sort of fill in the extra details. I mean, we talked about how the horse, the toy horse we saw earlier on, was a device that helped us to shortcut to the idea that Enzo knows horses. He can ride a horse later in the story, right? That somehow in his backstory, that horses have been a big deal just by showing that thing. Again, likewise, what we've got on the screen here, this kind of the idea of Sicilians emigrating to America, as shown by this postcard here. I know it's kind of a pretty overt device. But yeah, I mean, that's part of the story as well. It's part of the legend of the Sicilian Mafia and how it relates to the American Mafia. Yep. That at this time in history, tens or hundreds of thousands of people over the past, several decades have emigrated to America, taking with them the sort of criminal customs of the Sicilian Mafia in some cases. And so that's part of the story. That's part of what we were trying to flesh out here. And so just putting this little note here in terms of like that there are many young men at this time are thinking about emigrating for reasons which are the same as these guys, right? They've got no opportunity. They're living a very hard life. The new world seems to present this kind of life of new opportunities across the Atlantic. It was something we wanted to introduce here. I mean, I know some people have commented on the skyline of the Empire there being quite unrealistic.
It was something we talked about, right? We're conscious of that, but we also wanted, in the very brief glimpse you get of it, for it to be very recognisable, right? And that was the conversation we were turning over to understand exactly how we could show a skyline, which was, because obviously players who played previous Mafia games may understand Empire Bay and its significance, but there may be many players who've not played those games, and so we still need to be able to communicate to them what the promise of this
That's
card
true.
represents.
And there were some tall buildings in New York in the early 1900s. Just not maybe the kind of skyscrapers that you see in that image, but let's call it creative license.
Yeah,
we'll take some creative license there. And here we see Lombra his first introduction, Il Merlo's brother. Funny that they're both played by the same actor, by Raphael Corkhill, played both brothers.
Yep.
I think he did a great job of like giving them a nice. Obviously, we've visually differentiated them, but also in the performances. I don't think that would be something that an audience would necessarily see right off the bat.
Yeah.
But he managed to sort of give each character a little.
That's right.
A different tweak, a different kind of mannerisms and things like that, which was cool, while still having a accent or a manner of speech, which is, they're from the same family, they're brothers and everything like that. And here we go into the deep mine. So you mentioned you guys went on a trip, didn't you, to Sicily to kind of, and you did visit a sulfur mine.
Yeah, that's right. And it was a tremendous experience. We went to a small museum. We were taken through by the guide because there happened to be nobody else there that day, and he took us through all the exhibits, and so we learned a lot more about the processing of sulfur, but I think also a lot more about the impact of sort of a moment like this on the society, and certainly how modern Sicily is looking and rediscovering some elements of this past, and because it's a really terrible thing to have happened, and obviously in many countries around the world during the Industrial Revolution, similar stories emerge in different ways. And then going into the mines and sort of really seeing and touching the walls of the cave, because it looks kind of, as you can see here, it's almost like a conglomeration of boulders and rocks and sort of other things all holding it together. And that's accurate. The mines weren't really, as you might imagine, sort of bedrock mines where these wooden supports are holding up sort of a more substantial sort of rock ceiling. The whole place is so friable. You can almost like crumble bits of it off with your hand. And so these are almost here really, these sort of props that we can see, they're almost as they're almost as a superstitious charm rather than necessarily anything really substantial from an engineering point of view. And the miners that were working in that particular area were, because each of the miners was essentially working for themselves. They paid to the mine owner in order to be able to work there, and then they were paid on the sulfur they could extract, with their carusi, who were their child helpers, if you like, or the ones, they were at the mine face, and the carusi, the ones who were then taking these incredibly heavy baskets of sulfur ore up to the surface where it was then processed. But it's quite an incredible thing when you go there and you look at these places and imagine the stories that went on in these places, and that The Hunger Saint was one of the sort of recommended reading books, and the stories in there are just incredible.
Yes, I mean, very, very vivid depictions there, weren't there, of like the life of the sulfur miners, and particularly the kids. You know, the main character's a kid in that book, aren't they? Isn't he? And you know, that was it. You know, that's where our hero comes from, isn't it? That kind of background, surviving in this terrible environment. Yeah. And this whole sequence here was really kind of inspired by a section from that book where there is a mine, in that case, a mine collapse, which, you know, in the very, very vividly described, and as you can imagine, very terrifying. In, you know, what happens when everything sort of falls apart. But here was, you know, this was our kind of attempt at kind of recreating that. Now we can't quite capture the true terror of the mines, because you know we need to have lights down here. We need to have a space for the gameplay camera. We can't make it as claustrophobic or anything like that as it would have been in real life. So we take a little bit of license with like kind of the scale of some of the spaces and things like that. Because in real life, people are really squeezing through quite small spaces and things like that. And so when things go wrong and the lights go out, it's very, very scary. And so this was our best attempt at being able to recreate this, and making the enemy this gas they refer to as grizu. Fire damp is called in British miners would call it fire damp at the time. And this is gas that gets released from the earth when there's an earthquake or some fissure is opened or something like that under the earth. And this invisible gas, that's why they have this lamp here. You know, they hold it, and when it flares up, it shows you there's gas there, because you can't smell it, you can't taste it, you can't see it. Now, the problem was that you can't see it for us in a gameplay sense. So in the same way as we need lights so you can see player can see what to do. You know, it's hard for us to communicate an invisible threat. You know, something that's going to choke you silently to death.
And during an action sequence, where you need to immediately understand
that's right.
This is incredibly dangerous.
Music starts, everybody starts panicking, but it's invisible. So, you know, we did spend a lot of time on this, and actually it was quite late in the project, wasn't it, when we settled upon this treatment with this very, the fire all around the tunnels and everything like that. It looks very dramatic here. But a couple of months before we shipped the game, this was still, empty, and we were sort of trying to communicate this without this purple gas. You know what I mean? Like, we actually had to take again some liberties with what this would look like in real life to make it visible to the player. But again, I applaud the sort of visual direction here and the VFX work to bring this concept to life and actually make this very urgent and terrifying, which was important to us, of course, to really convey what's happening here.
That's right. I played this sequence many times over the course of the game, and the tunnel collapses, I think, are really beautifully done as well, where I will still run to that that space there, but there's enough time for the collapse to happen for me to redirect quite seamlessly. And there's so much work in making something like that seem natural and seamless, which doesn't get talked about, and it's quite hard to explain because it's lots of iterations.
That's right. Yeah.
Work between the lighting team and the environment teams and everybody working together to make all of this stuff feel natural.
Because this is really, isn't it? This is really that, isn't it? It's trying to encourage the player to do things in a sort of a split second. Follow a path, do a thing, jump over a thing, through subtle, or not so subtle, in some cases, kind of prompts on the screen. It's important that everything goes right first time. If we don't want players to fail here, we want them to run through the experience and survive it first time. Right. And so, I think the effect, the end result is very effective. And we have this nice moment here, don't we? Like, Enzo's collapsed down. In fact, this moment was originally a lot longer, but it was quite dull. So we sort of really cut it down to its core part, which is Enzo that falls down into this sort of further pit, and then he's saved here by Gaetano. Like, the two of them have been saving one another throughout this, kind of showing their bond of friendship, risking their lives to help one another. And actually that little moment there where
echo of the gesture.
It is, it is an echo of the gesture. It's a good point, because the end of the story when Cesare does the same to Enzo, that's is intended to be a reflection of this moment. Where his Enzo's dear friend stoops to help him and pull him out from a dangerous place. And so, Gaetano and his final moments here, as we're about to see.
Don't go back, Gaetano.
I mean, I know we all say that, but I think the thing to understand is how important this money is to them. This money they've been saving for a decade or more together you know, to try and buy their way out of this mine. It's their only way out. And the idea that at that last moment that he will genuinely turn around and risk his life to save it, I think is really, you know, you really need to understand how important it was to them. It's 100%. Not just a bag of pennies. It's like a new, it really is a new life for them. And so,
and he could easily be thinking, that's taken me 5 years to save up. I'm not going to last another 5 years.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's right. I mean, it's a fair assumption that this, you know, what the Carusi do is very dangerous, isn't it? You know, they could die at any moment. These kind of collapses were not uncommon in real life. And so, yeah, there's just the pure desperation that would drive someone back to sort of pick up that bag, I think is, you know, was supposed to reflect how important it was to them to kind of, you know, cash that money in and escape from this mine.
Yeah. Let me see a little bit of the aftermath.
Yeah. And then, you know, another little interaction with Il Merlo.
You did this. You sent us down there. No one tenders that she will, boy.
I love this moment with the two of them and a little bit of an eye roll as Enzo pushes it just a little bit too far. And as you say, considering that's the same actor reacting to a performance a bit previously.
Yeah. And so, yeah, here is, you know, this is, you know, our first knife duel. Again, we had challenges here, didn't we, in terms of getting the player up to speed quite quickly with something which got its own subsystem of game mechanics. And so, you know, we opted here for a very simplistic kind of small version of knife dueling, and just to introduce the player to the first buttons and really focusing on this first combat interaction between Enzo and his hated nemesis, Il Merlo. And I think it's pretty effective at doing both of those things. Gives a, you know, first little kind of play on the pad, but also really kind of sets the scene for their future enmity.
And the knife wound.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. That, and you know, I think that it was funny, wasn't it? Because we, you know, as we in his concept art and in his kind of vision, he has this big wound on his face, doesn't he, all the way through the project. It was kind of how we envisaged him and was a big part of his character. But it was almost the last thing that got added to his character, wasn't it? So for most of the game, this wasn't clear, but then he gets this for most development. So, you know, most things come together at the end, don't they? That last sort of 6 months or so of any game development is where suddenly all of these things that you've been talking about and seeing in, you know, in concept art or discussing finally come to reality. In some cases, important things like that, like even the idea that he's been disfigured in this fight.
In a similar fashion, right? The blood and tracking of blood and damage and dirt through various sequences was, you know, a really heavy undertaking to make sure that we didn't sort of overwhelm ourselves with a huge amount of characters, but we could also really embed the characters in scenes. And when he emerges from the mines there, I think it's really important that everybody's just covered in dust, and, you know, so you really feel like they've all just basically crawled up from the bowels of the earth to try and make it sort of back into the light.
And here we go, Enzo galloping from the mine. This triumphant escape, you know, desperate escape. I don't know how much triumph there is in that sequence, to be honest. It's a bit of a desperate escape. And now we enter into this intro credits, which, you know, we're really keen on introducing the game in a way that was evocative of Mafia 1 and Mafia Definitive Edition, both of which featured these very memorable intro sequences which showed fly through of the wild and lots of little a slice of life, lots of little scenery, landmarks in Lost Heaven. And we wanted to do something similar here for Sicily, didn't we? But like maybe with a slightly different stylistic edge.
That's right. And to your point, this is another sequence that came together pretty late towards the end of the project, right? But just to be able to introduce all the different themes of Sicily, you know, we've shown players a very, you know, small area of Sicily with hopefully a very rich flavour. And now we're starting to expand that canvas, and we're hinting at some of the locations and some parts of Sicily you'll see later in the game, and maybe even some of the characters you'll meet. And I really like that, especially when you see the tuner later on, and that plays a really important role in the game. That we're kind of seeding these ideas with players, but also I think welcoming them to this incredibly new world that they haven't experienced before in a Mafia game.
I mean, I think the guys did a really good job here in like representing the game world, bringing in all of these the iconography of 1900 Sicily, this kind of criminal undercurrent to many of the images that makes innocent images with a kind of a sinister edge to them. And I hope, conveyed at least the same kind of epic, sweeping feeling, than the original Mafia did.